Wrinkled skin, sagging breasts, yellow teeth, and stringy hair. Normal old woman or creature of horror? In the broader conversation around beauty standards, we might not consider the impact of horror cinema. But as an antagonist-focused genre, the way people look is incredibly significant. I believe firmly that the features selected for demons, monsters, and serial killers do have an impact on how we view people with those same features in real life. A toothless smile might frighten us, even if the person behind it is kind and gentle. Milky or bloodshot eyes might make us wary of someone going about their day as everyone else is. The choices made by filmmakers can simply be brushed off as not that deep, or continuing the legacy of classic monsters. But the subject of body and beauty discourse in horror is growing louder as on-screen trends emerge. And the area being explored and discussed the most right now is that of the aging body. From the substance to weapons to exes Pearl and Howard, old people can't catch a break as either the butt of the joke or the source of audience scares. So today I want to look at how we present older bodies in horror cinema, why notable trends have developed, and what they say about how we view aging and the elderly in real life. And in case you can't tell, I am dressed as your grandfather. Yours specifically. So, the conversation around crazy old ladies in cinema has been piqued by the release of Zach Cregger's Weapons a month or so ago. I've seen think pieces, tweets, and podcasts all drawing attention to the fact that this is his second film featuring a monstrous or villainous elderly woman. But this archetypal elder evil is far from a new phenomenon. At this point, you've probably heard the term hagsploitation plenty of times, which refers typically to unstable older women in antagonistic roles, their wrinkled, drooping appearance increasing our aversion toward them. This in itself is an evolution from the psycho biddy trope, which is effectively the same thing with a different name before we began adding sploitation to everything post-1970s. Psycho biddies on screen are mentally deranged aging women. Although, by my observation, there was less emphasis on extreme physicality than in hagsploitation. My ex-boyfriend used to call me biddy. What did he mean? Bette Davis and Joan Crawford were big players in this arena, playing psycho biddy roles in the ever-impactful Whatever Happened to Baby Jane, The Nanny, Straitjacket, and Dead Ringer. Other notable biddies are The Omen's Mrs. Baylock, Lady in a Cage, and Whoever Slew Auntie Roo. Baby Jane aside, they all look pretty normal. They're older women with coiffed formal hair and fairly modest clothing. Significantly, their nude bodies aren't featured at all, likely as a result of the Hays Code banning nudity in film between 1934 and 1968. Roman Polanski's Rosemary's Baby introduced a whole cast of crazed older folk, with the men and women who infiltrate the life of the lovely young Rosemary to use her fertile body for evil. Evil. Taking advantage of being a coloured film, the older women stand out for their garish makeup and bright clothing. And while I personally love a diva who expresses themselves, their deep red blushes, large hats, and clashing outfits are supposed to indicate that something is off with them. Dr. Saperstein and Woodhouse aside, the men wear their fair share of fun accessories and bold prints and colours. And so a vivacious old person becomes a threat. Why are they so desperate to be fun and lively? 1980's The Shining introduced a new nightmare old woman, but this time her naked body, arms outstretched to Jack, ready to envelop him, were central to what made her horrifying. She's toothless, with thinning hair, skin macerated by the bathwater, and an utmost horror, her breasts are almost indiscernible from her body, flat and lifeless, hanging to her waist. They are diametrically opposed to the bouncing bosom of a healthy 1970s hottie found roller skating on Venice Beach, or a housewife whose body is cut to unreasonably angular perfection by a bullet bra. The sagging, hunched nude has since become a horror staple, popping up in numerous films such as 2007's Wreck, Robert Eggers' The Witch, and It Chapter 2, throughout the 2000s, 2010s, and 2020s. While not exaggerated in appearance, who fingered me? Great. Who can forget realizing that Hereditary was filled with hidden nude figures of various men and women? Alongside these, the 2000s onwards saw plenty of witch-like, wicked women who kept their clothes on, with stringy hair, yellow teeth, sunken or milky eyes, and pallid skin in The Taking, Dead Silent, and The Conjuring universe. Men tend to get off a little easier across the board. Say that again. Men tend to get off a little easier across the board and are mostly neatly buttoned up or grandfatherly in appearance, with collared shirts, clean slacks, and wife beaters, which we see in Saw, Tusk, and House of the Devil. Although The Greasy Strangler and House of a Thousand Corpses push their elderly male villains into more campy and grotesque territory. And as is the inspiration for this video, the last few years in particular have given us some very notable horror characters like Pearl and Howard, Elizabeth Sparkle, Aunt Gladys, and Barbarians the Mother. Increasingly, the crazed hag, gormless or villainous elderly figure has evolved to the point that their old bodies are almost considered the most horrifying thing about them. Being in cahoots with the devil or ensnaring children isn't enough to inspire fear anymore. You must also have knee knockers and no Botox. And I will say, as a caveat here, that Gladys, who we will discuss in more detail later, defies categorization a bit, as she doesn't share nudity with many of her modern counterparts, and in many ways more closely resembles the divas of Bramford. Nonetheless, her image is intrinsically linked with her fear factor, her cracked painted face alone used for many isolated scares. This body-focused image is plastered on modern horror and quite clear when you compare the pre- and post-2000s images on my research mood board. Psycho biddies are sophisticates compared to their modern hag counterparts. And speaking of my mood board, let me show you how today's sponsor Milano helped me plan for this video. Oh hi, welcome to my office. Milano is a tool for organising your creative projects. Think corkboard and red string, but digital and borderless. As you can see here, there are over 100 templates made to suit your perfect needs, whether you're a journalist, filmmaker, or DIY sewing extraordinaire, or you can start from scratch. The first part of my process in making this video was gathering all of the images of aging horror bodies, and Milano couldn't have made this easier. I created this reference board, and the flexible, visually focused layout allowed me to see patterns and organise exactly as I see things in my head, adding notes along the way to keep track of my thoughts. This kind of visual organisation works perfectly for the way I think as a creative, scatterbrained person, and I love that the format can be completely open and up to you. As I had so many reference images in this instance, I put them in a subboard I can access from my project page, as you can see here, to keep it nice and neat. And you can add pretty much anything to your board, so I also have links to articles I read while prepping, videos I watched, the Letterboxd reviews, and extra notes I wanted on my mind while writing. With Milanote's web clipper extension, you can hit this little button at any time and send the link straight to your board to arrange later. And the desktop and phone app stay synced so you can update your boards on the go. While I didn't need them on this project, you can also add to-do lists, spreadsheets, and maps, and invite others to collaborate and feedback on your boards in real time. So it's not just about getting your brain in order, but truly prepping and scheduling and collaborating in order to bring your work to life. And the best part is that Milano is available for free with no time limit. So sign up using the link in my description and begin your next creative project today. Excuse me. Perhaps one of the most obvious points of horror observed in these elder characters is a lack of relatability. If you're younger than 60 and watching horror films, for the most part, these figures are the other, the antithesis of the norm. The long-established norm on screen, as influenced by all manner of isms and phobias, is young, slim, white, and generically attractive. For maximum relatability and likability, our protagonists tend to have these features. And as protagonists, they're often our story's moral compass and hero, associating youth as a core quality with moral good. This is perfectly illustrated with Final Girls. Our blushing ingenues with their bouncy hair, clear skin, Bambi-like limbs, and pink lips. Final Girls are inoffensively generic pretty girls across the board, even if their characters have been jacked up to more exciting heights in recent decades, a la Samara Weaving's Grace or Melissa Barrera's Sam. These women are all very beautiful and very youthful. Ultimately, they are the film's good guys, determined to be most worthy of survival. And with every lead under 30 without a crease above their brow or dimples in their thighs, we, with muddied intent, deem the opposite unworthy. Deviations from the norm trigger discomfort, and if we are underexposed to something, we are shocked by it. This discomfort is heightened by exaggerating the physical features of the elderly, creating even more contrast with both ourselves, the younger audience, and the other characters in the film. Characters acknowledging this dichotomy has given us the trope of an old hag craving a younger body. Youth becomes the goal for which the hag is willing to go to great, terrifying, and disgusting lengths. Coralie Fajart's The Substance is the most recent notable horror to play with the hag, and every goddamn emphasis is put on the horrors of Elizabeth Sparkle's aging body. It's the sole horror on display. In contrast, Sue, known to those close to her as Susan Beverly Stance, is showered with praise for her youth and beauty. And the cinematography wants us to know exactly why everyone is so up her arse, metaphorically speaking. We are beaten over the head with shots of Margaret Qualley's rounded cheeks and her SFX enhanced breasts. Can I just say, there is no good word for breasts. If I say boobs, I feel like a 12-year-old boy. And if I say breasts, I feel like a PE teacher who's been tasked with teaching sex ed. The shots linger, roaming around her perfectly smooth curves. And this is often how hot young bodies are shown, which I discuss in my Hot Girls Must Die video. They are shot in intimate close-up, highlighting their perfection and equally dehumanizing them by turning each body part into a solo object. Cameras travel along, gradually undulating young bodies, hovering over them as our eyes hover over lovers in real life, in awe of them. The cinematography wants our minds on sex. But this is not how the old bodies of horror are shot. Instead, they are often presented as looming figures, captured at a distance, too unpleasant to hold on up close. In many of the recent examples, we only catch glimpses of their entire form as they lunge at the camera or scuttle away, their unified features creating a body unknown to us. The shots are shorter in length but wider in framing, revealing a whole ugly truth but urging us to look away. If ever we do get a good look up close, it's the face in harsh lighting, magnifying every crease, wrinkle, sunken cheek, or bloated nose. The response to 2022's X is a fascinating glimpse into how we view older bodies. specifically as a horror audience. Here, our own aversion to age is reflected back on us in the way the film is shot. Not because it shoots the older bodies in a haunting way, but because it shoots them in the same way as the young characters. In the infamous sex scene between the two villains, none of the familiar camera work is used to make Pearl and Howard seem grotesque and monstrous. Ty West isn't doing anything to make the moment feel gross or inhuman, and there's plenty of other questionable sex and murder in the film. Yet this is the scene that had people declaring that octogenarian shagging was the film's true horror. People who don't like this movie will say that West is the one being ageist, but I really don't think he's doing anything more than turning the mirror on us. We, the audience, put so much focus on their sex scene, and they're literally just having sex. The scene looks like any other generic sex scene you would see on TV between two 20-year-olds. But we are so averse to seeing old bodies do what we think young bodies are supposed to do. Deep down, I believe we feel that sex is a privilege of the young and attractive, expressing their vitality, and we don't like to imagine the quote-unquote other partaking in that same pleasure. At a fundamental level, I feel like part of our fear of the elderly is that they remind us that life has an end point. Aging is an inevitability, and rather than that fact giving us more empathy for our elder counterparts, it makes us uncomfortable around them. As in real life, older bodies on screen inherently remind us of death. And death is a pretty major part of horror media. Most often, it's the thing that all our characters are trying to evade one way or another. Subconscious lingerings aside, filmmakers really amp up the visual elements of human decay with older villains to make sure that that deathly warning is front of mind. In some cases, their image is pushed into almost corpse-like territory, with mottled white skin and visible veins, or extremely thin bodies. Dead body, trigger warning, but if you have seen the body of anyone, old or young, they often have a strange sheen to them, like they're made of wax, and they can seem very small. Seeing my grandfather after he died was such a bizarre thing because he had been a rugged, red-cheeked, full-bodied man all of my life, and in his coffin, his features were completely sunken, and his low weight made him look almost child-sized. Even our mother of the House of Weapons, who is for the most part seen dolled up in her already iconic fierce bob and bold lip, is revealed to look like a generic sickly old woman without her drag on. Her hair is falling out, her teeth have rotted away, and her limbs are frail. And where Gladys's true appearance is a result of illness of the body, illness of the mind can also take hold of someone's appearance. Forgetting or neglecting to wash, to clean your teeth, to brush your hair can result in old people looking pretty rough. And again, lots of directors lean into this by making their characters physically dirty or oily. The Taking of Deborah Logan, sometimes known simply as The Taking, is a faux doco about a woman with dementia that eventually crosses into supernatural territory as her behaviour becomes increasingly strange. It's a film that I don't entirely love due to its found footage execution, but I find the character of Deborah absolutely heartbreaking and unnerving. While a supernatural possession is revealed, much of Deborah's behaviour is that of someone with a neurodegenerative disease. This causes an inability to look after herself and stay clean and healthy, leaving her dirty and thin. She devolves from a smart, sharp woman into a gormless figure with limited speech. She disappears, gets lost, experiences heightened emotions and delusions. It's nightmarish, but all entirely real. Many of these physical and behavioral qualities pop up in our other horror monsters, furthering the devastating and damaging idea that people who suffer these conditions are becoming less human. The fear of death itself can also manifest in horror as an antagonist's motive. Not quite the same as the hags that vie for youth based only on appearance. Rather, these villains seek the life force of the young. For Gladys, it's the energy. For Rosemary's neighbours, it's her fertility. For most of our explicit witches, it's extending their time or fulfilling an offering. I think X is a really fun indirect exploration of this trope, as Pearl gains nothing practical or physical from her killing. She is stealing the youth from a gang of adult actors purely so they can't enjoy it, because she didn't enjoy her own young years and it's left her bitter and jealous. Queen shit. Kidding. Don't kill people. Don't do that. It's bad. I wonder if what frightens us most about this microtrope is that we believe on some level that old people are taking time and energy away from us that we don't want to give them. On screen, we see the insidious elderly as wanting to snatch something from us, to drain us, making us wary of their motives. But in real life, we allow this to affect us every time we shuffle away from an old lady at the bus stop who wants a chat, or we tell our grandparents we're too busy to come over to theirs for Sunday tea. We've allowed ourselves to believe that they are not as worthy of our time and efforts as other young people. And speaking of grandparents specifically, M. Night Shyamalan's The Visit is an interesting case study, as visually the two elder villains are completely regular, presented as the main character's grandparents. They're not that old, they're very well kept, wear nice, fairly modern and clean outfits, but this too is used to further the horror. Very, very broadly speaking, and I know this is not the case for everyone, but the only overtly positive light in which we tend to see old people is in our own grandparents, because we actually know them and we feel for them, and we've spent our upbringings being doted on as the apple of their eye. Again, this isn't everybody's experience, but that's a fairly generic grandparent and child relationship. So having the kindly, warm, smiling, generic grandparents who show no visual indicators of unpleasantry enact terrors on our young leads in The Visit feels like it breaks a sort of social contract. These are the only kinds of old bodies we've been trained to trust, and the film subverts that. And while The Visit's grandparents are consciously enacting cruelty, like Deborah Logan, if you take it out of a horror context, much of their behaviour resembles something like dementia or Alzheimer's. Seeing human minds and bodies change and degrade in real life is genuinely really challenging. So it's no surprise it stirs up such discomfort in audiences, reminding us of the deaths of loved ones, the trials of illness, and that train to nowhere that one day we all have to board. What? A section on misogyny? But this video is supposed to be about old people. Couldn't be a girl on film video if it didn't all come back to hating women. So, where does misogyny come into play here? As you may have picked up throughout this discussion, old women have a more prominent presence in horror, at least as monsters and villains, than the menfolk. I've discussed this many times before, that obviously men are in films more. Look at any generic blockbusters poster, even today, and the cast will likely be 4 male leads and 1 woman. However, with this trope in particular, there are far fewer notable men, especially in recent films. And I am aware, for what it's worth, that there might be old movies and indie movies that I'm not aware of. I'm not a super niche movie lover. So we're definitely discussing the major players in horror. So there are a lot of old women appearing at the moment. And while I'm ecstatic that older women are getting to do fun things on screen and being cast in horror, it rings a little problematic bell in my head when I consider that much of the horror of this trope centers around being perceived as monstrous. In general, the prominent older men of horror are not made to look grotesque, with lanky limbs or potbellies or bubbling flesh. They certainly don't have their bellends flailing around like the heavy naturals of our monstrous girlies. The villainy of the villains in Saw, Tusk, Don't Breathe, House of the Devil doesn't hinge on an extreme appearance. They look, for the most part, remarkably unremarkable. I mean, look at this. You wouldn't even know John Kramer was an old man. There are, of course, exceptions, such as the skin and bones Dr. Satan strapped into permanent breathing apparatus in House of a Thousand Corpses, but even Texas Chainsaw's dehydrated grandpa still gets to wear a nice snazzy suit. And don't get me wrong, all the aforementioned men are just as monstrous as the women inside. But it's the fact that it is inside that intrigues me. And more often than not, when an old person's naked body specifically is shown or played for scares, it's again a woman's body. I've mentioned the big naked lady trope already in the video, but this really has been a modern horror heavy hitter as far as recurring tropes go. And this comparison between the genders highlights something rather ugly. We fear men for their character, for their minds. We fear women for their bodies. And this doesn't really come as a surprise, given the association between appearance and value is greater for women right from childhood. While all genders experience the pressures of beauty norms, I think it's fair to say we hold women to higher standards. Think makeup and hairlessness. These entirely constructed elements of femininity are almost a requirement for normalcy, which we don't require of men. And I know there are people who will probably bring into question things like balding as a comparable beauty standard for men. But women go bald too, and it's just as, if not more, negative to be a bald woman. The point here is simply that we have many standards which women must live up to, and the films I'm discussing today put an emphasis on how horrifying it is not to live up to them. This is super obvious in how we often visualize witches. The most basic shorthand is that evil women are old and ugly, and nudity means even more physicality with which to expose their undesirable traits. Of course, not all women in horror are painted with this intrinsically misogynistic brush, or even an ageist one. Halloween 2018's Laurie or the most recent Texas Chainsaw Massacre's Sally are older women. They are comfortably attractive without an emphasis on beauty, fit, and dressed modestly. But they are the outliers of the fairer sex who have otherwise been designated to droop and drool at our displeasure. I've also noticed that several of the naked lady monsters in Barbarian Wreck and Smile are male performers in prosthetics, emphasizing a further problematic idea that a woman with more masculine features, taller, squarer, a heavier brow, broader shoulders, is more disturbing than other women. A final important argument on the side that this trope is rooted in misogyny is that, bar the substances Elizabeth, every single other scary old woman and villainous biddy we've discussed was created by a man. Many of the monster's bodies aren't a stretch from the reality of a normal woman as she ages or post-birth. And I can't help but feel it exposes how averse men are to women in their natural state. Now, everything said, there is some ground to say this trope isn't all bad, and that its modern iteration is a response to horror history. I am only 12, so I can only speak to modern cinema. We could argue that the scary old people trope as it appears in modern horror is satirizing our fears of the elderly. I think that T. West's X genuinely and successfully is satirizing it, which I explain in depth in one of my earliest videos. In Pearl, the psycho biddy is elevated into fully fledged complex character, not just as a misunderstood madwoman hovering somewhere in the background. 2022's Saw 10, also known as Sawks, gave remarkable depth to Granddaddy John Kramer, giving the character the reins for the entire runtime, along with Tobin Bell's brilliant performance, had us all empathizing with the notorious serial killer. Zach Cregger's offerings in the field are particularly interesting to me because of how they simultaneously contribute to and destabilize the negative aspects of the scary old people stereotypes. The mother in Barbarian is ultimately a sympathetic creature created by male evil. The backstory subverts the monstrous trope, as she is not, in fact, a monster, but her arc is far from redemptive, and the film still utilizes her Haggadah period for a good dose of its horror. I meant to say appearance, but I am on my period. Gladys of his latest movie Weapons is without question the villain, but is her campy and unconventional presentation enough to say that she is above the aforementioned criticisms of this video? She's become an instant icon, beloved by audiences because she's genuinely kind of cool. There is a real element of aspiration there. And then there's the question of empowerment. There is something somewhat feminist in the outright unappealing nature of these characters. They could be viewed as celebrations of manic womanhood, of finally letting go and not bending to pressures in your old age, exploring the explosion of rage felt by aging women, repressed and ignored. Are these films giving us Black Swan for the octogenarians? And I might find space for this reading if any of our elderly female monsters, aside from Pearl, had protagonist status or had been handled by women, or for that matter, played by older women, giving older actresses some exposure, which several of these roles don't do. And I'm sure right now you are screaming at me to bring up the substance. The substance falls into both categories here, the positive and the negative, with Fargiat declaring it is a feminist film, and I think it certainly gets the closest to using the trope for good. So many people loved this film. I'm assured by the many angry comments on my elevated horror videos that a lot of women really resonated with it. However, it didn't sit entirely right with me personally for a few reasons. I felt Fargia in the film honoured Demi Moore's real body, an older body than we might be used to seeing on screen, especially in a neutral framing as the bathroom setting provides. Although we can't ignore the fact that Moore looks much younger than she actually is and can take advantage of every method of preserving youth like diet support and personal training, and more than likely cryo chambers and vampire facials. And I don't mind that her body and face don't reflect the average 50-year-old, as the character being an actress gives it contextual sense. Where this film loses me is its depiction of Elizabeth's next evolution. It is the older and socially less desirable body that is humiliated in the film, physically beaten and laughed at. And I recognise that Monstro Elizasu is supposed to be so deformed that we're able to see the humour in it, but all I could see was a real woman's body. And it honestly made me feel kind of sad and sick sitting in a theatre where people were shrieking with laughter at it. I mentioned in my Letterboxd review seeing a mirror image of my boobs in this movie, and I wasn't joking. The changes I've seen in my late 20s in my own body, the development of my empathy breasts, made Monstro Elizasu much harder to see as a comical creature. Maybe one day I'll embrace this film like many others have and see the humour in it, but I find it hard to believe everyone screeching with laughter in the cinema was embracing Monstro Elizasu for the right reasons. Ultimately, I just don't think we're at the point where we can satirize aging bodies because we've never celebrated them. There is no real positive representation. There is only punching down. One elderly villain, here or there, isn't a bad thing in isolation. It's exciting for any actress to play a villain, and I sure as hell wouldn't have wanted to miss Amy Madigan's performance as Gladys, but it's in the emerging patterns that the issue is clear. In horror cinema, old people and their bodies are rarely presented as neutral, let alone aspirational. We relegate them to adding colour to the world, colour that contrasts with the fresh-faced protagonists. Their role is to make the world feel grimy, scary, gross, and dangerous. A lack here of older leads exposes our inability to see the elderly as relatable and likeable. We don't see them like us, but as the other. And the more monsters we introduce that are disgusting purely because they are old, the more we widen that emotional distance from the elderly in real life. In general, we're just a crazy f***ing ageist society. Yeah, I said it. We live in a society. It's ugly and painful to acknowledge, but we avoid old people. We ignore them. The invisible elderly is a well-established phenomenon for anyone who has asked or looked into it. And this idea, sadly, is pushed in horror cinema. Regarding the beauty discourse specifically, I can't help but feel that every time we see pendulum breasts and caked-on makeup sinking into wrinkled skin on unlikable or monstrous antagonists, we fear our own changing bodies and faces even more. Along with TikTok, social media, mainstream media, and advertising, it's another push towards Botox, another push towards time and money wasting 20-step skincare routines, towards disordered eating, towards self-hatred. And that is all I have for you today, folks. With love, from your grandfather, Girl on Film. Before I go, I want to say thank you again to Milano. Please check them out. And also want to draw attention to the fact that I recently started a Patreon. I'm doing extra bonus content on there, and it is also a way that you can support me financially. Thank you for being here. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I look forward to hearing what you have to say in the comments.